Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a reclusive landowner returns to his remote Montana cabin, he finds a warning from a power-hungry HOA president claiming his home isn't his. But she picked the wrong man and the wrong mountain for a battle over land, law, and sanity. What follows is pure wildfire. I returned to Boone Ridge late in the evening, easing my truck onto the narrow dirt path that wound up the slope toward my cabin. The headlights carved long streaks across the pines, their needles shivering in the cold Montana wind that rolled off Arrowhead Lake like a warning breath. It had been nearly a week since I'd seen this place. Seattle had drained me, as it always did. Too much concrete, too much noise, too many people pretending to be important. By contrast, the old hunting cabin perched above the water had a kind of quiet honesty. Built in the early 1900s by a man who felled the trees with his own axe and hauled the logs with his own hands. Restored by me with the same stubbornness, this place didn't need anyone's approval. I killed the engine, stepped out, stretched my back, and breathed in the sharp scent of snowmelt and pine. My boots crunched over the gravel as I walked toward the cabin. The lantern I kept on the porch was still where I'd left it. Nothing looked disturbed until I saw the piece of paper slapped onto the front door, flapping slightly in the wind like it was trying to get my attention. The bold letters were printed in a bureaucratic font so self-important it practically sneered at me. Property of HOA, unauthorized occupancy, subject to removal. And below that, a signature. Karen Denton, President, Oak Shores HOA. I stood there for several seconds, blinking at the note. Then I let out a short laugh, one of those low, disbelieving laughs that come from the gut, the kind you give when the world does something so ridiculous it circles back to entertaining. Oak Shores HOA was a recent addition to the valley, a cluster of cottages built on 8 acres I'd leased out years ago to avoid fighting a development that would have been built somewhere here anyway. Leasing that patch had protected the rest of Boone Ridge from being carved up, and now, apparently, they'd gotten ambitious. I peeled the note off the door and turned it over, half expecting instructions on how to summon Satan or pay dues. Nothing. Just the audacity. Of all things, I muttered, stuffing it in my pocket and unlocking the cabin. I hadn't even stepped 1 foot inside when bright white LED headlights washed over the trees behind me. I turned to see an electric HOA-branded utility cart rolling up the slope like a smug golf cart with delusions of authority. The woman driving it looked exactly like you'd imagine someone named Karen Denton would look. Stiff posture, a face that permanently conveyed disapproval, and a tablet clutched in her hands like it was a holy relic. Next to her sat a man in a windbreaker labeled Lake Coordinator, which sounded like a job invented at a committee meeting by people who'd never touched water. She parked crookedly, hopped out, and marched toward me. "Sir," she said sharply, "you are occupying a restricted lakeside community structure without authorization." I leaned against the porch post, crossing my arms. "This is my home. This," she snapped, waving her tablet like a weapon, "is a lakeside structure belonging to Oak Shores HOA. It is classified as community access property per our bylaw number. It was built in 1905, I cut in. My land, my cabin, my name on the deed." She blinked at me, offended I'd interrupted her proclamation. "You can't expect me to believe that. This area is designated for HOA-managed recreation." "You're standing on my land," I said calmly. "In fact, you're about 200 feet past your own property line." Karen turned to the man beside her, whispering furiously. The lake coordinator nodded and pulled out some laminated map clearly printed from a website that believed clipper trees represented real forests. "I need to see your documentation," Karen demanded. "And if you refuse, I'll consider this trespassing and call authorities immediately." I pointed to the granite boundary marker embedded at the corner of the porch, an old stone slab with a carved cadastral number and the state crest. "There's your documentation. Been here longer than either of us has been alive." She stomped toward it, squinted, gasped like she'd been personally insulted, then spun around and jabbed her finger at me. "This is fake." "It's literally chiseled into rock," I replied. "Not many counterfeiters specialize in stone engraving these days." Her face went a shade of red, I usually associated with sunburn or malfunctioning generators. She snatched her phone and punched numbers with enough force to break the screen. "I am reporting an intruder to 911, she declared. "Stay where you are." "Wouldn't dream of leaving," I said, stepping into the cabin and flipping on the lights. I could already imagine the conversation. "Hello. Yes, there's a man in his own home. Please send the cavalry. It took about 20 minutes. I'd set my duffel down, started heating water for tea, and was sorting the stack of mail I'd brought from town when the sound of engines reached me from the trail below. 3 police SUVs crawled up the slope, followed by a local news van whose timing was either suspicious or very, very lucky. I stepped onto the porch just as the officers climbed out. Before any of them could approach, Karen rushed past them and pointed at me like she was summoning a firing squad. "Officers, arrest him immediately. He is occupying HOA property and threatening the safety of our community." One of the deputies raised an eyebrow and called out, "Sir, can we speak with you?" "Of course," I said, reaching into my bag for the leather folio where I kept my primary documents. I handed them over calmly. Notarized ownership certificates, the Boone Ridge land trust paperwork, maps stamped and signed by the governor's office, and the deed tracing the cabin's history back more than a century. The lead deputy studied each page carefully. Behind him, Karen kept pacing, ranting loud enough for everyone to hear. "That paperwork is fraudulent. He forged it. He forged all of it. Ask the governor. He's part of the conspiracy too." The deputy closed the folio, handed it back, and lowered his voice. "Sir, you're good. More than good, actually. I didn't know anyone owned more than half the county around here." 92%, I corrected lightly. He let out a brief, impressed whistle. "Well, that explains a lot." Behind us, the second deputy muttered to another officer, "We've had 4 calls from her this week. Yesterday, she tried to report a kid fishing." The news crew had their cameras trained on the scene, capturing every ounce of hysteria dripping off Karen as she yelled at anyone who would listen, and several people who definitely didn't want to. "This is an abuse of public lands," she shrieked. "He is stealing resources from the people. He is endangering all of us." The deputy finally turned and told her she needed to calm down or step back. She accused him of being complicit. He warned her again. She kept yelling. The camera zoomed in. She shouted something wildly incoherent about sovereign lakes and federal conspiracies. I watched silently as the circus unfolded around me, the cold wind tugging at my jacket and the smell of pine smoke drifting from my cabin stovepipe. It was surreal, absurd, and weirdly mesmerizing. When Karen is your opponent, reality tends to get bent out of shape. The officers eventually convinced her to return to her HOA cart while they finished the report, and the news crew moved in immediately to interview them. The last thing I saw before stepping back into my cabin was the reporter's mic pointed at Karen as she ranted into the lens, her voice cracking under the strain of pure indignation. By the time the SUVs rolled back down the trail, the mountain silence returned, but the echo of her meltdown clung to the air like static electricity. Something told me this was only the beginning, and Karen Denton was nowhere near done embarrassing herself. The next morning, I woke to the kind of silence that only a Montana lake can offer. Thin, cold, and honest. For a few seconds, I enjoyed it, letting the early light slide across the wooden ceiling of the cabin. Then my phone vibrated on the bedside table, insisting I rejoin the modern world. I reached for it, already suspecting the peace wouldn't last. I was right. My notifications were an absolute avalanche. Dozens of messages from friends, colleagues, journalists I hadn't spoken to in years. Even my brother, who usually only texted when he needed to borrow a chainsaw. It took me a moment to understand why everyone was sending the same kind of message. "Dude, is that you in the lake house video?" "River, what the hell happened? You're trending." Like, actually trending. Still half asleep, I opened the link someone had sent with the caption, "You're famous." It was a clipped news segment, poorly edited, clearly rushed to air. The reporter narrated over shaky footage of last night's chaos, her voice calm and composed, while the screen showed Karen screaming at a deputy, her hair flying around like she was summoning a storm. Then came the raw footage someone in the crowd had taken, her voice high, furious, cracking as she shouted about conspiracies, danger, criminal trespass, the sovereign domain of Oak Shores, and something about protecting the waters from invaders. It was unhinged enough that even I had to blink. The clip ended with me standing quietly on the porch while she screeched at 3 deputies. The contrast was apparently hilarious to the internet. The comments below were merciless. HOA boss fight unlocked. She's 1 raccoon away from total meltdown. Dramatic reenactment of my mother-in-law. Give this man the lake. All of it. I put the phone down, pinched the bridge of my nose, and let myself smile despite everything. If Karen wanted attention, she'd certainly gotten it, just not the kind she expected. By the time I'd made coffee and stepped onto the porch, a car was already creeping up the hillside. Not a police cruiser this time, but a Subaru with a family of 4 inside. The father leaned out the window, grinning sheepishly. "Hey, sorry to bother you," he said. "Is this where the HOA meltdown happened? My wife showed me the video. Had to see the spot myself." "Not a tourist attraction," I said, though without any real irritation. He apologized again and drove off, but he wasn't the only one. Throughout the morning, people came by. Hikers, locals, even an elderly couple who wanted to confirm the crazy lady from TV lived down the hill. Every one of them left shaking their heads, muttering something between disbelief and amusement. Around noon, I walked down toward the slope overlooking the 8-acre HOA village. Smoke rose from someone's chimney. A few residents stood outside their modern cottages, glancing up toward my cabin with a mixture of curiosity and confusion. They weren't hostile, not yet, just bewildered. That changed once I reached the trailhead. A woman hurried toward me, mid-40s, anxious, clutching a dog leash without the dog. "Mr. Maxwell, I just wanted to apologize," she said. "I didn't realize this was your land. Karen told us someone was squatting here and that we needed to defend our community." "Nothing to apologize for," I said. "People tend to trust the person who hands them paperwork." That made her wince. "You should know, Karen's organizing a meeting this afternoon. She said she's going to expose your fraud." I couldn't help but laugh. I'll look forward to seeing what she invents next. I continued toward the lower ridge trail when a man jogged toward me with a clipboard. "Sir," he said breathlessly, "we need to talk." I recognized him from last night, the so-called lake coordinator. He cleared his throat and tried to stand taller. "Per order of President Denton, all unauthorized persons are to vacate the lakeside zone until we resolve the ownership dispute. President Denton can put her orders in a scrapbook for all I care," I replied. "Your authority ends at the boundary stone. You were standing on it yesterday. Remember?" He flushed bright red but persisted. "We're issuing citations, daily fines for non-compliance, and notice of potential civil action." "Wonderful. I can add it to the growing collection of HOA fiction I intend to show my attorney." I stepped around him and kept walking. He tried to follow, but gave up when he realized he was losing dignity with each step. By mid-afternoon, the HOA gathering was in full swing on the community lawn below. I stayed just out of sight, leaning against a pine tree on my land, watching the theater unfold. Karen stood on a makeshift platform, 2 patio tables stacked together, holding a binder thick enough to smuggle a bulldog inside. Her voice carried across the valley with the confidence of someone who had never once doubted she was right. "Residents of Oak Shores," she proclaimed, "we are under attack by a man illegally occupying community land. He forged documents. He bribed state officials. He is attempting a hostile takeover of our water rights." The crowd murmured. A few nodded. Most looked uneasy. One kid in the back recorded everything with his phone, trying not to laugh. Karen flipped through printouts of maps so inaccurate I wondered if they'd been drawn by a child with a crayon and a vendetta. She jabbed at one map showing my cabin plastered with a red X. "This dwelling belongs to the community," she insisted, "and I will not allow unauthorized individuals to threaten our harmony." Someone raised a hand. "But the video, she snarled, was doctored. Propaganda. A smear campaign orchestrated by outsiders." More murmurs, this time skeptical. Then she did something truly impressive. She wheeled out a folding barrier, one of those plastic crowd control fences, and declared it would be installed around the disputed lakefront zone to prevent further intrusion. The problem? She pointed toward a line well inside my land. That was enough. I descended the trail and approached slowly, my boots crunching on the frost-bitten dirt. Conversations quieted. People turned. Karen's triumphant expression wavered when she realized I was coming straight toward her. "You're not allowed here," she shouted. "This is a private HOA meeting." "You're holding it on my property," I said. "So yes, I'm allowed here." Gasps. One guy actually took a step back like I'd dropped a bomb. Karen sputtered, That is impossible. This is Oak Shores community ground." I knelt, brushed away some pine needles, and tapped the granite boundary marker embedded in the soil beneath her fencing. Every head turned down to look. Even the kid recording whispered, "Oh, damn." Karen's face twitched. This boundary is incorrect, tampered with, installed illegally." "It's been here since 1947, I said. "If it was tampered with, it was by time. Someone in the crowd snorted. Karen doubled down. "I demand you leave. This is a violation of HOA code." I raised my voice just enough. "I don't answer to the HOA. I never have. You're leasing 8 acres from the Boone Ridge Land Trust. Everything else you see, including the ground you're standing on, is mine." A silence settled over the crowd, thick and uncomfortable. Karen looked around, expecting backup, but the very people who'd believed her an hour earlier now avoided her eyes. She panicked. "Fine," she screamed. "If you will not leave, I will make you leave." She pulled out her phone, turned away dramatically, and shouted for all to hear, "This is an emergency. There is an aggressive trespasser at Oak Shores. Send officers immediately." And just like that, she called 911 on me again. As she continued screaming into the phone, I just stood there, hands in my pockets, listening to the residents mutter among themselves in a mixture of embarrassment, confusion, and disbelief. Somewhere in the distance, faint at first, a siren wailed. Karen straightened like she'd just summoned divine justice. "You're finished," she hissed. But judging by the shifting expressions around us, most people already suspected the opposite. By the time the patrol truck crawled up the ridge, the HOA crowd had already scattered into uneasy clusters. Some drifted back toward their cottages. Others pretended to check their mailboxes just to avoid eye contact with Karen. She stood stiffly in the middle of the clearing, phone still in hand, looking like she'd personally summoned the National Guard. The deputy climbed out, someone I hadn't seen before, young, serious, the kind of officer who still believed the world made sense. He walked up with a hand resting lightly on his belt. "Afternoon," he said. "We got a call about a trespasser refusing to leave HOA property." I gestured toward Karen. She made that call. Karen immediately stormed forward. "Arrest him. He's defying community authority and threatening residents." The deputy blinked slowly, then turned to me. "Sir, do you have ID?" I handed him my folio, the same documents from the night before. Trust ownership certificates, the state map, the cadastral boundaries signed by the governor. He scanned through them quickly, then looked at Karen with an expression that hovered somewhere between pity and annoyance. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "this shows he owns the land you're standing on." "That paperwork is fraudulent," she snapped. "We have our own maps." The deputy didn't bother hiding his sigh. "Your HOA lease is for 8 acres below the ridge. This cabin is not part of that lease," she sputtered. "This can't be right. Our records clearly show—" "Your records," the deputy said, "aren't the law." That set her off again. "Then someone forged the boundary stones. He tricked the state. He bribed someone." The deputy held up a hand. "Ma'am, enough." I could feel the tension shift. A couple of HOA residents hung back, listening, whispering. The lake coordinator looked like he wished he could crawl into the nearest ground squirrel hole and stay there permanently. "Look," the deputy continued, "we're going to file this as a false emergency call. Again, if this keeps happening, charges may follow." Karen went pale for a moment, then red again, switching emotions so fast she looked unstable. She turned on the crowd. "You're all witnesses. You know he doesn't belong here." No one answered, not a single person. After an awkward silence, the deputy returned my documents and gave a respectful nod. "Sorry for the trouble, Mr. Maxwell. We'll make sure this gets noted." They left her standing alone on the trail, gripping her binder like a life raft. I walked back toward my cabin, and halfway up the slope, one of the HOA residents jogged up to me, middle-aged, nervous, looking over his shoulder. "Hey," he whispered, "I shouldn't be saying this, but you need to know. Karen's planning something bigger. She's calling it a restoration campaign. Meetings every evening. She says she'll take back the shoreline." "Take back," I repeated. "From whom?" He swallowed. "From you. She says the HOA is going to challenge your entire trust. Legally, publicly. She's already drafting petitions." Of course she was. "And one more thing," he added. "She's telling people you're using the cabin for illegal stuff. Suspicious activity. Drugs, smuggling, whatever she can think of." I exhaled slowly. "Thanks for the warning." He nodded, relieved, and hurried back down before anyone saw him talking to me. By sundown, I saw the first signs of her so-called campaign. Flimsy plastic barriers placed just past the tree line, definitely on my land. Cardboard signs declaring community area no trespassing, staked into the soil like a child's attempt at seizing territory in a backyard war. And then, just to complete the insanity, several drones hovered briefly near my cabin window before buzzing back toward the HOA cottages. Surveillance? Perfect. I grabbed my phone and called my attorney, Evie Bronson. She picked up on the second ring. "Let me guess," she said without greeting. "The HOA queen has escalated. Barriers on my land, false emergency calls, drones, and apparently she's promising to challenge the entire trust." Evie snorted. "She can try, and fail spectacularly." "I figured as much, but we need to start documenting everything." "We're way ahead of that," she said. "State environmental inspectors are coming tomorrow. Turns out your new friends in Oak Shores may be breaking shoreline laws by trying to build anything up there." That actually made me smile. Convenient timing. "No," she said. "It's perfect timing. And trust me, this will get messy for her long before it gets messy for you." As I hung up, I looked out across Arrowhead Lake, the last of the sunset sliding over its surface. The plastic HOA barriers rustled in the wind like flimsy props in a play no one believed in. Karen Denton wasn't just misguided, she was gearing up for a full-blown war. And she had no idea she was standing on 92% of my ammunition. Federal inspectors arrived early the next morning, 2 people in state jackets, clipboards out, already irritated before anyone from the HOA had even reached them. I led them down the slope, pointing out the flimsy plastic barriers Karen's group had planted. The inspectors exchanged a single look that said everything. They knew exactly what kind of nonsense this was. One of them crouched beside the boundary marker, brushing his glove over the engraved state seal. "This is original," he said, "untouched. Whoever's claiming otherwise is wasting everyone's time." Right on cue, Karen marched toward us with 3 HOA members trailing behind her like nervous ducklings. She waved a thick binder at the inspectors. "Good, you're here. Arrest him, fine him, whatever you have to do. He's trespassing on community shoreline and interfering with HOA management operations." The older inspector sighed. "Ma'am, you don't have jurisdiction here." "Yes, I do," she snapped. "The map clearly states—" "The map you sent to our office," he interrupted, "is not an official document, and the geodetic signature is fabricated." Her face twitched. "That's impossible." The inspector folded his clipboard. "We're opening a review into your HOA's activities. For now, remove these barriers. They're illegally placed." Karen's voice rose to a near shriek. "You're all part of his conspiracy. This land belongs to the community." Her own members stepped back from her. One muttered, "Karen, maybe we should—" She spun on him. "Silence. I speak for all of you." The inspectors ignored her entirely and turned to me. "Mr. Maxwell, we'll file a formal notice. Keep documenting everything." They left. Karen didn't. She stormed up the ridge toward me. "You think you can scare us with officials? You won't win. I'm filing a lawsuit to void your entire trust, and I'm calling a mandatory HOA emergency meeting." "On my land again?" I asked. "On community land." I pointed at the boundary marker. "Still mine." She froze for a moment, furious and confused at the same time, then stomped away. An hour later, her drones were back. Not subtle, not legal. Hovering barely 10 feet above my roofline like angry metal mosquitoes. I filmed them, called Evie, and sent her the footage. Evie's response was immediate. "Good. This is evidence of harassment and illegal surveillance. Keep recording." By evening, HOA residents were already gathering at their meeting house. Through the trees, I could hear raised voices, some questioning Karen, others blindly agreeing. The air felt charged, like the whole place was ready to snap. And I knew one thing for sure. Karen wasn't slowing down. She was accelerating. By the next morning, the situation had shifted from irritating to outright dangerous. Evie arrived in person, stepping out of her SUV with that calm, steady confidence that usually meant someone was about to get legally obliterated. I walked her down toward the HOA entrance, where the plastic barriers still lay abandoned in a heap. "Good," she said, snapping a few photos. "Every violation she creates stacks another charge." Before we reached the cottages, a resident hurried toward us. A man in his 60s, clutching a folder like it was radioactive. He looked around nervously, then thrust it into Evie's hands. "I can't keep this," he said. "Karen made us sign these. Payments, access passes. She said the shoreline was ours and that the money went to the state. But—" he swallowed. "There was no state email, just her." Evie opened the folder. It was full of receipts, shoreline access fees, all signed by Karen. The amounts weren't small. Some residents had paid thousands. I exhaled. She sold access to land she didn't own. Evie nodded once. "That's fraud, a big one." We barely had time to absorb that before a second resident jogged over, a woman holding a printed map. She told us this was the new official boundary. But the date on the seal, look. Evie turned the page and let out a low whistle. The geodetic signature is from someone who died 20 years ago. Word was spreading. Residents whispered among themselves. Several looked sick. Then Karen stormed out of the meeting house, spotted us, and practically sprinted over. "You!" she shouted at me. "You're manipulating my community with fake evidence." Evie stepped forward. "Ms. Denton, multiple residents have given us documents you issued illegally. As of this moment, we're submitting everything to the county prosecutor." Karen's jaw dropped. "You can't do that." "We already did," Evie said, holding up her phone. That broke something in Karen. Her voice cracked into a trembling rage. "I am the legal authority here. I decide the boundaries. I decide the access. This entire area belongs to the people of Oak Shores." Residents behind her stared in open disbelief. One finally spoke. "Karen, you lied to us." She spun on them. "I did what was necessary to protect our land." Another resident stepped forward. "By selling it?" Karen pointed at him like she meant to stab him with her finger. "Traitor!" At that moment, the sheriff's truck rolled up. He got out, nodding politely to Evie, then turned to Karen. "Ms. Denton, we need to talk at the station about the complaints filed." Karen stiffened. "I'm not going anywhere with you." "That wasn't a request," the sheriff said. The color drained from her face. He didn't arrest her, not yet, but he escorted her to his truck. And the moment they drove off, the residents didn't cheer, didn't celebrate. They simply looked relieved. Because for the first time, they understood she wasn't a leader. She was a disaster. The next days moved fast, faster than even Karen could scream. The county courthouse scheduled an emergency hearing after reviewing Evie's evidence. By noon, the HOA meeting house was nearly empty. Most residents chose to stay far away from what they called, with painful honesty, Karen's final performance. Evie and I walked into the courtroom together. Karen was already there, gripping a stack of files so tightly her knuckles were white. Her lawyer looked exhausted, like he regretted every life choice that led him to this moment. The judge entered, stern and already irritated. "We're here to address multiple conflicting property claims," he said. "Ms. Denton, you may begin." Karen leapt up. "Your Honor, the community of Oak Shores has been infiltrated by a fraud. He forged deeds, bribed officials, and..." The judge raised a hand. "Stop. Present evidence only." With a triumphant look, she slapped down her official maps onto the court's desk. The judge examined the first one for all of 5 seconds. "Ms. Denton," he said slowly, "why is this map signed by a surveyor who passed away 2 decades ago?" Karen froze. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. The judge picked up another paper. "And this document, the seal doesn't match any State Department. It's printed on glossy craft store paper." Her lawyer dropped his face into his hands. Evie stepped forward. "Your Honor, in addition to falsified maps, we have receipts showing Ms. Denton sold shoreline access she did not own, sent fraudulent invoices, and filed multiple knowingly false emergency calls." She handed the judge a folder. He skimmed the contents, his expression turning from annoyed to stunned. "This," he said quietly, "is not a civil matter. This is criminal." Right then, the courtroom doors opened. The sheriff entered with 2 deputies. He approached the judge, whispered something, then stepped aside. The judge looked at Karen. "Ms. Denton, the county prosecutor, has issued a warrant." Karen's entire body jerked. "For who?" "For you." The deputies stepped forward. Her voice cracked. "You can't arrest me. I'm the president of this HOA." Evie murmured. "Not for long." Karen tried to back away, but the deputies gently but firmly took her by the arms. "You're being taken into custody for fraud, falsification of state documents, and unlawful land transactions." Residents in the back, those who came just to witness, stared in disbelief. Some sighed. One woman quietly said, "God help us." Karen screamed as they guided her out. Threats, insults, promises of revenge. None of it mattered now. The judge cleared his throat. "Given the circumstances, all claims filed by Oak Shores HOA against Mr. Maxwell are dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, the HOA will undergo full state audit." Evie nodded, satisfied. I simply exhaled. Outside the courthouse, reporters were already waiting. I ignored them and walked straight toward my truck. Evie followed. "Well," she said, closing her briefcase, "that's the beginning of the end." And she was right. The fall of Oak Shores had only just begun. News of Karen's arrest spread through Oak Shores faster than wildfire in dry brush. By the time I drove back toward the valley, half the residents were outside, talking in low, shaken voices. Some clutched folders of paperwork they clearly intended to hand over to authorities. Others just looked stunned, as if waking from a long, strange dream. The sheriff's truck rolled in behind me. He stepped out, hat tucked under his arm, looking tired but grimly satisfied. "Maxwell," he said, "thought you should know. Prosecutors adding charges. Turns out your HOA president left a hell of a trail." "Not my HOA," I corrected. He cracked a tired smile. "Fair enough. But it's hers. And what's left of it isn't pretty." As if on cue, 2 deputies approached the HOA office building, an oversized shed with delusions of grandeur. They pulled the door open with a warrant in hand. Residents gathered, watching anxiously as the deputies carried out boxes of files, laptops, hard drives, even a locked metal case. One deputy muttered loud enough for us all to hear, "Yep, this is going to take weeks to sort through." A woman from the HOA stepped forward, wringing her hands. "Is it true," she asked the sheriff, "that she was selling land? Faking maps?" He nodded. "Afraid so, ma'am. You all were victims too." That hit the crowd hard. Several people sank onto porch steps. One older man shook his head. "She told us we had to donate for shoreline expansion. I gave her $5,000. Another woman whispered she threatened to fine us if we questioned her. And then, almost as if confessing, more residents began speaking. Stories about manipulated ballots, mysterious fees, threats of eviction for petty rule violations. Everything poured out. A community unloading months of pressure they never realized was abnormal. Evie arrived and immediately began collecting written statements. Residents practically lined up to hand her documents. Every new sheet only deepened the crater Karen had created. Meanwhile, the sheriff oversaw the final sweep of the HOA office. One deputy came out holding a drone case. 5 more of these, he called, all unregistered, illegal surveillance. Just like we suspected. Another deputy emerged with a folder labeled Expansion Plan Phase 3. Inside, printed maps extending HOA boundaries across miles of my land. Notes in Karen's handwriting. Convince state officials. If they refuse, escalate. Evie showed me the pages. She was planning a takeover, she said, step by step. She didn't get far, I replied. Far enough for prison, Evie answered. By evening, a temporary state-appointed administrator arrived to dissolve the HOA board. Residents watched as the HOA sign was taken down. Some cried, not out of sadness, but relief. The administrator approached me with a firm handshake. "Mr. Maxwell, on behalf of the state, thank you for your cooperation. This would have spiraled if you hadn't pushed back early." I nodded, though the absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on me. Hours earlier, Karen was screaming about conspiracies. Now half the county was sorting through the fallout she left behind. As the sun dropped behind the ridge, the last deputy emerged from the office, locked the door, and sealed it with tape. That was the final breath of Oak Shores as it used to be, and the first quiet moment the valley had felt since Karen showed up. The morning after the HOA office was sealed felt different, lighter, like the entire ridge had exhaled at once. The lake was perfectly still, reflecting a clear sky untouched by stress or shouting. I stood on the porch with a mug of coffee, listening to the quiet. No drones, no boot prints that didn't belong, no HOA patrol cart buzzing up the slope at dawn. Halfway through my coffee, my phone buzzed. "Evie, sent you the ruling," she said. "It's official. The court order arrived as a PDF. All HOA claims dismissed. My land trust fully validated. HOA activities restricted pending full audit. And the big one, State v. Denton, 12 years imprisonment, no early release. 12 years. For Karen, it might as well have been a century. I walked down toward the cottages later that day. Without the HOA sign and without Karen marching around barking orders, the place looked normal. People chatted on porches. Kids played near the community garden without being scolded for stepping an inch off the path. A neighbor waved awkwardly as I passed. "Mr. Maxwell," she said, stepping closer, "I just wanted to apologize. All of us. We really had no idea what she was doing." "You don't owe me anything," I said. "She had you convinced." "It won't happen again," she promised. "We're electing a new board, a real one, with rules that make sense." "Good," I said. "The place deserves better." By afternoon, PBS arrived for an interview. A quiet reporter and a cameraman who seemed stunned by the landscape. They filmed near the shoreline while I explained the land trust, the cabin's history, and the restoration projects I'd overseen. The reporter asked how I felt about everything that happened. I shrugged. She crossed boundaries. Literally. I just protected what was mine. When they left, a group of residents approached, some holding a wooden plaque. They handed it to me shyly. "For the cabin," one said. "To say thank you." The plaque read, "Boone Ridge Cabin, protected since 1905. Below that, thanks to R. Maxwell for saving what matters." I wasn't sentimental, but that one got to me. As evening settled, I walked along the waterline. The breeze carried the smell of pine and cold lake water. The cabin stood behind me, solid and timeless. And for the first time in weeks, there was no tension coiled in the air, no threat lurking behind paperwork or fences. Just quiet, just land, mine to protect, mine to restore. Karen was behind bars. The HOA was dissolved. The county had clarity again, and I'd earned a peace deeper than any silence that came before.